What if the only person capable of healing the emptiness in his life arrived unexpectedly, carrying an apron, a simple smile, and a secret that could destroy everything? Robert has lost the love of his life and with it, the ability to connect with what matters most, his daughter. In a cold, silent mansion, where not even the weather dares to speak up, he lives surrounded by luxury, but drowning in absence. Until Caroline shows up. An ordinary cook at first glance, but with a rare gift. She brings smiles where there was only silence, but she carries something dark. A past that knocks at the door without warning, threatening to turn a newly rebuilt home into ruins once again. This is not just a love story. It's about redemption, second chances, and what you would do to protect the one you love, even when everything says run away. Stay with us. Because the answer to what really matters is hidden in every look, every gesture, and in a simple hot cookie straight out of the oven. The silence inside the mansion was so thick that it seemed to have weight. Robert's footsteps echoed like empty echoes in corridors too long to be traversed by just two pairs of feet. He stopped in front of the living room door and observed Sophia sitting on the carpet, drawing with crayons on a crumpled piece of paper. Her brown hair fell over her face, and she held the chalk as if each line she drew was a timid attempt to fill a void. "Daddy, why don't you smile anymore?" The question came out of nowhere, low, but with enough force to break any soul. Robert didn't know what to say. He swallowed dryly and looked at the floor, as if searching for an answer that wasn't there. What could he say? That since his wife's death, smiling had become a distant memory. That there were days when he even forgot how to talk to his own daughter. "It's just, I have a lot on my mind, Sophia," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Sophia just went back to drawing. There was no charge in her voice, just a realization, as if she had got used to the absence of emotions, even at such a young age. Robert approached, crouching down next to her. He looked at the drawing. It was a house with 3 figures. The third, furthest away, looked faded. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing to the figure that was separated from the other 2. Sophia looked, hesitated, and then replied without emotion, "Mom." Robert felt a tightness in his chest, so intense that he had to sit down on the floor. The soft carpet wasn't enough to soften the weight of the guilt he was carrying. He knew that he had distanced himself from his daughter. He knew that his grief had paralyzed him. But staring at the reflection of this in Sophia's drawings was unbearable. Later, sitting on the sofa with a cup of cold coffee in his hands, he watched his daughter play with a battered teddy bear. She shook the doll's paws as if talking to it. No words escaped her mouth, but her eyes said more than any speech. There was a loneliness there that Robert recognized all too well, the same loneliness that lived inside him. "I don't know how to be a father anymore," he whispered, as if confessing a crime to himself. The mansion, once vibrant, full of laughter, and the aroma of cake coming out of the oven, was now a mausoleum of memories. The sound of the wall clock was a cruel reminder of all that was gone. He got up and walked to his room, but before he climbed the stairs, he looked at Sophia again. She was staring at him. There was no judgment, just a mute question. "Are you still there?" That night, Robert went to bed unable to close his eyes. He picked up the picture frame next to the bed, the last photo of the 3 of them together, and ran his fingers over his wife's smile. He felt overwhelmed by the time he had let pass. He didn't know how to start again, but a spark was restless. Something inside him whispered, "There's still time for her." Robert opened the notebook on his desk. There was something different that morning, a restlessness that pushed him out of the doldrums. He picked up the pen and wrote in firm letters, as if the strength of the writing could reinforce his determination. "I need someone who cooks and can look after." When she called the domestic service agency, her voice was more serene than she had expected. "I'm not just looking for a cook," she said. "I need someone who knows how to deal with children, with silence, with pain." The woman on the other side hesitated. "I understand, sir. I have someone who might fit in. Can I send her tomorrow?" Robert replied with a simple yes and hung up. He spent the rest of the day watching Sophia play by herself, her gaze always distant, as if she were floating in another world. He called her to dinner, and as always, she came in silence, sitting down at the table without even looking at him. The next day, the doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. Opening the door, Robert was met by a woman with lively eyes and a broad smile, Caroline. She was carrying a large handbag, with the handle of a wooden spoon showing and an apron folded over her arm. Her hair tied up in an improvised way revealed the practicality of someone who didn't care about appearances. "Good morning, I'm Caroline," she said naturally, as if she already knew the place. "Did you bring your own pans?" Robert asked, surprised to see the utensils. "I always do. I trust them more than anything," he replied, stepping confidently inside. Sophia appeared in the hallway, holding the teddy bear to her chest. Her eyes were fixed on the stranger. Caroline crouched down to the girl's height. "Hi, little one. Do you like sweet dumplings?" Sophia didn't answer. Silence was her mother tongue, but the scent escaping from Caroline's bag awakened something in her senses. The cook took a small box out of her bag and opened it. Inside were sugar-coated cookies. The girl hesitated, took a deep breath and took a step closer. She didn't take it yet, but her eyes were fixed on the sweets. Robert watched from the doorway, arms crossed, intrigued. Caroline got up and went straight to the kitchen. "I don't usually waste time. Where's the flour?" she asked, already opening cupboards. The smell of melted butter and vanilla soon began to dominate the air. Caroline was whistling a soft melody, something familiar and old. Sophia approached, attracted by the sound and the warmth that was rising inside the kitchen. Robert, from the stairs, wondered how someone could transform the environment so quickly. How could a stranger occupy the emptiness of the house so naturally? When the dumplings were ready, Caroline put them on a plate and held it out to Sophia. The little girl looked up, took one in both hands, and took a shy bite. That's when something incredible happened. A slight smile formed on her lips. Robert saw it and knew deep down that the house was starting to breathe again. The morning sun streamed in through the tall windows, streaking the kitchen floor with golden stripes. Caroline moved lightly between the stove and the worktop, whistling a soft song that seemed to have been forgotten by time. As she mixed the dough for a new dish, her feet glided to the rhythm of the melody. It wasn't just food she was preparing. It was a ritual of care. Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway, the teddy bear dangling from her hand. Her eyes followed the woman's every move. Caroline noticed her presence and smiled. "Do you want to help me today, little one?" she asked. "I promise it will be fun." The girl hesitated, but took a few steps forward. Caroline handed her some flour and a small rolling pin. "You can knead it like this," she said, demonstrating. Sophia tried, a little clumsily. The dough stuck to her fingers, and a bit of flour accidentally fell on her nose. Caroline laughed and said, "I think you've just invented the pastry chef's nose." And then it happened. A short, crystal-clear laugh escaped the girl's lips. It was like the sound of a small bell, vibrant, unexpected. Caroline froze for a second, struck by that moment. Sophia covered her nose with her hands, embarrassed, but Caroline reassured her. "You have the most beautiful laugh I've ever heard." Upstairs, Robert interrupted the reading of a report. He heard the sound and stopped for a moment. It was impossible to mistake that laugh. He got up and walked slowly down the stairs, stopping on the last step. The scene before him was like a painting. Sophia kneading the dough with her dirty hands, Caroline wiping the flour from her face with a cloth, both smiling as if time had gone back to before the sadness. He said nothing. He just watched, his heart beating faster. Later, while Caroline was washing the dishes and Sophia was drawing at the kitchen table, Robert approached. "You have a strange way of changing things around here," he commented, looking at the lively environment. "Strange?" Caroline laughed. "I like to think it's just Heat. Robert was silent for a few seconds, then muttered, "It's been a long time since this house was warm." Caroline looked at him sideways, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. It was unusual to see such a restrained man open up, even through a crack. "Maybe all it needs is to be lit again," she said, going back to rinsing the dishes. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Robert stared at the ceiling of his room. Caroline's words echoed in his mind. Being lit again. Could it be possible? Could the fire that once inhabited that house burn again? He turned to the side and picked up the photo of his wife. He ran his fingers over the image and whispered, "Maybe you sent Caroline here." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, he felt light. Sophia's laughter still resonated in his memory. The newly installed tranquility in the mansion was shattered by a sharp, unexpected sound. Caroline's cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, knocking over a spoon that fell to the floor with a metallic clang. She quickly wiped her hands and picked up the phone, bringing it to her ear with a nervous gesture. "Hello?" On the other end, a deep voice answered, cold as metal. "Time is running out, Caroline. Either pay up, or I'll lose my temper." She looked at the door as if she feared someone might hear. She lowered her tone. I'm already trying. Just give me a little more. 3 days. And don't try to disappear." The call dropped. Caroline stood still for a moment, her eyes fixed nowhere, the phone still glued to her ear. The sound of the tap running brought her back. She put her cell phone away in her apron and took a deep breath. Robert was passing in the corridor and heard part of the conversation. Her voice sounded tense, different from her usual lightness. He hesitated for a second before entering the kitchen. "Everything all right in here?" Caroline turned quickly, forcing a smile. "Yes, just a personal call." Robert watched her for a few moments but didn't insist. He got a glass of water and left. However, unease was already beginning to settle in his chest. That night, while Sophia slept, Caroline spent more time in the kitchen, slowly stirring the spoon in the pot. Even though she wasn't hungry, her hands were shaking. She knew that Victor didn't make empty threats. She had seen what he was capable of up close. Later, sitting at the table with a cloth in her hands, Caroline whispered to herself, "I can't lose this. Not now." Robert, on the other side of the door, overheard. His instinct told him that there was something broken in that strong, smiling woman, something she was struggling to hide, but he still didn't know if he wanted to find out what it was. The next day, over coffee, Sophia appeared with a drawing of a cake and handed it to Caroline. "Can you make this one today?" Caroline smiled sincerely for the first time in days. "Of course, little one." As she prepared the ingredients, Caroline often looked at her cell phone, dreading to see it vibrate again. When it finally rang, her heart raced. But it was only a reminder of the alarm. Even so, Robert noticed her jump and approached her. "Caroline, are you sure everything is all right?" She answered almost immediately. "I just have a bit of a headache, nothing major." But her eyes avoided his. Later, alone in the guest room, Caroline sat on the bed and took a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It was the same note she had received a few days earlier. On it, just one sentence. "The debt is due soon. You know what happens if you don't pay." She closed her eyes tightly, trying to hold back the tears. In the darkness of the corridor, Robert stood motionless, his fist clenched. He had just heard everything. The evening arrived with a cold wind and a sky covered in heavy clouds. The mansion seemed darker than usual, even with the lights on. Robert was in his office going over documents, but his mind was far away. Caroline's latest actions were on his mind. There was something she was hiding, something that was weighing on her, and he felt that weight growing. Outside, a man standing on the sidewalk watched the house with hard eyes. He was wearing a dark coat and a cap pulled down to his eyebrows. Victor. He took a slow drag on his cigarette, and the smoke rose lazily, as if savoring the time. In his hand, a crumpled envelope. "Do you think you can run away, Caroline?" he muttered, before throwing the cigarette down and walking slowly down the street. In the kitchen, Caroline was finishing dinner. The good smell contrasted with the tension on her face. Sophia was drawing at the table, concentrating, but looked up when Caroline stopped for a moment, staring into the void. "Carol?" She blinked and smiled. "I'm here, little one. Would you like to help set the table?" The girl nodded, jumping up from her chair. Caroline watched that simple gesture and felt an ache in her chest. That house, that child. They were everything she wanted to protect. Later, with Sophia asleep and the dishes washed, Caroline returned to the kitchen to get her handbag. She found an envelope attached to the back door handle. Her hands froze. She opened it carefully and read, "Pay in 3 days, or the girl's father will know everything." The note trembled in her fingers. She swallowed dryly, looked around, and put the paper in her handbag, as if it were poison. Her steps to the bedroom were slow. When she closed the door, she sat down on the bed and covered her face with her hands. "I can't lose them. Not now." The next morning, while preparing pancakes for breakfast, Caroline heard a different noise outside. She went to the window and saw a car standing on the corner, its headlights off. She recognized the silhouette. Victor. He was close. Very close. Robert went downstairs and found her standing at the window. "Is something wrong?" She turned around quickly. "No, I just thought I saw a cat." Robert approached the window, but the car had already left. He stared at her. "Caroline, if something's going on, I need to know." She lowered her eyes. "It's nothing. I'm just tired, Robert. That's all." But he didn't believe her. At the end of the day, when Caroline left to go home, Robert watched her through the window. Her steps were faster than usual. She seemed to be running away from her own shadow. He sighed and said softly, "Who are you, Caroline? And what are you trying so hard to protect?" Outside, among the trees, Victor smiled in the dim light. The sky had darkened earlier than expected, as if the day also knew that something was about to happen. The wind blew hard, making the trees around the mansion sway in agitation. Inside the kitchen, Caroline was chopping vegetables in silence. Her eyes were glued to the chopping board, but her mind wandered. Every second seemed to drag by, like a clock without hands. In the living room, Sophia was building towers with wooden blocks, humming the song Caroline had taught her. Robert, in his study, was reading absent-mindedly when he heard the doorbell. A sudden, impatient ring, which made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He got up and walked to the front door. When he opened it, he was confronted by a tall man with an arrogant posture and eyes as dark as pitch. He was wearing a long coat that was wet from the drizzle that was starting to fall. It was Victor. "Who are you?" Robert asked, frowning. "I've come to see Caroline," he replied, without looking away. Robert felt something instinctive ignite inside him. A warning. Before he could answer, Caroline appeared in the corridor, and on seeing the man, turned pale. "No!" she exclaimed, running to the door. "Victor, go away!" Victor smiled sideways, pleased to have upset her. 3 days, Caroline, I told you so. I'm not a man of many words." Robert stood between them, crossing his arms. "Are you threatening someone here in my house?" "Ask her. Ask her what she owes me," said Victor, throwing a crumpled envelope at her feet before turning and leaving. The silence became heavy. Caroline bent down, picked up the envelope with trembling hands, and couldn't hold back the tears that poured out without asking permission. Sophia appeared in the hallway, frightened, holding her teddy bear. "Mom?" The word echoed like thunder. Caroline fell to her knees, pulling the little girl close. Sophia cried softly, not understanding, but feeling the fear. Robert closed the door tightly and looked at Caroline. "You're going to tell me now." She took a deep breath, her voice breaking. "I owed him money to pay for my mother's treatment. When she died, he started charging me more than we agreed. I can't afford it. And I was afraid to tell him." Robert ran a hand through his hair in disbelief. "You should have told me before. I was afraid of losing it here. You." Sophia held the teddy tighter, looking from her father to Caroline. The silence dragged on. "That man, he's dangerous," Robert said quietly. "And now he knows where we are." Caroline nodded, wiping her face. "I understand if you want me to leave." Robert hesitated. For a moment, everything in him wanted to send her away, but then he looked at his daughter, hugging that woman with whom he was smiling again. He sighed. "No, but you have to tell me everything, from the beginning." The atmosphere inside the mansion was more tense than the cloudy sky outside. Robert paced back and forth in the living room, his hands in his pockets and his jaw clenched. Caroline, sitting on the edge of the sofa, kept her eyes downcast. Sophia, sitting on the carpet with her teddy bear on her lap, watched the two of them in silence. "Why didn't you tell me before?" asked Robert, breaking the silence with a low but firm voice. "Because I knew you wouldn't trust me," replied Caroline without raising her head. "I didn't want to lose you." Robert took a deep breath. "I had a right to know that a dangerous man could break into my house, that my daughter's life was at risk. I know," she shouted, finally raising her face. Her eyes were red. "But I just wanted a chance to start again. I've never had that." Here I felt at home for the first time. Sophia stood up, approached the woman, and silently hugged her by the legs. She leaned her head against her apron and said softly, "You're not leaving." Caroline swallowed, putting her hand on the girl's hair. "I don't want to go, little one. I really don't." Robert watched the scene. He saw there a daughter looking for a mother she had found again, and a woman who, although shrouded in secrets, had done more for her daughter's happiness than he himself had in the last 2 years. He sat back in the armchair and ran his hand over his face. He was torn. "I just need time," he murmured. "Time to understand all this. To calm down." Caroline nodded. "Of course. Whatever you need. I won't hide anything anymore." The day passed slowly. Caroline stayed in the house preparing dinner in silence. Sophia, closer than ever, wouldn't let her go. They drew together, played with modeling clay, and with every little gesture, the bond between them seemed stronger, truer. Robert, from the stairs, watched everything. There was doubt in his eyes, yes, but there was also something harder to admit: hope. In the evening, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Caroline appeared in the living room with a glass of water in her hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. Robert looked at her seriously. "For what?" "For not hating me." He hesitated for a second, then replied, "I don't hate you, Caroline. I just don't know what to do with it all yet." She gave him a small smile, tired but sincere. "I understand, and I'll wait." In that instant, something invisible between them grew stronger. A bridge. Fragile, yes, but real. Robert looked up at the ceiling and thought of his wife. Would she approve of all this? Sophia calling another woman mother? He didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that love could return, even if it came from an unexpected place. The day began with golden light streaming through the windows of the mansion, as if the sun itself had decided to warm the home with more affection. Caroline arrived early as usual, with her bag slung over her shoulder and her apron in her hands. There was tiredness in her eyes, but also something new. Relief. Robert was waiting for her in the kitchen. He was standing, leaning against the counter, with a more serene expression than in previous days. "I spoke to the police," he said bluntly. "Victor has been arrested. The complaint about threats and trespassing had already been registered by another family. You won't have to worry about him anymore." Caroline stopped, surprised. "Is he really under arrest?" Robert nodded. "Yes, and as for the debt, I paid it." "What?" She took a step forward. "Robert, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she replied firmly, "because you've already done much more for me and Sophia than any amount of money." Caroline covered her mouth with her hands, trying to hold back the tears. "I don't know how to thank you. Stay, just stay," he said. "That's all I ask." Sophia came running down the hall, still in her pajamas, and hugged Caroline by the legs. "Do you have cookies today?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, there are, little one, lots of them," replied Caroline, already smiling. In the kitchen, her hands moved with precision and lightness. She mixed the ingredients with care, while Sophia, next to her, molded the balls with her small hands. Robert watched the scene leaning against the door, his arms crossed and a discreet smile on his face. "What are you doing there?" he asked. "Magic," replied Caroline, winking. When the cookies were ready, the sweet smell permeated the whole house. The three of them sat down at the table and ate together. Sophia excitedly smeared sugar on her nose and made everyone laugh. It was a simple scene, but full of meaning. Later, Sophia and Caroline were drawing in the living room. The girl made a huge sun with flowers around it and handed it to Robert. "It's to hang on the wall next to Mom," she said, pointing to the picture of his wife. Robert looked at the picture, then at Caroline. Their eyes met for a few long seconds. He walked over to the wall and carefully hung the sheet next to the frame. "I think she'd like that," he said. Caroline approached and put a hand on his arm. They didn't say anything, but the silence was full of understanding. In the evening, Caroline helped Sophia into her pajamas and took her to bed. She stayed there until the girl was asleep, then slowly left and met Robert in the hallway. "Thank you for letting me stay," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing life back to this house," he replied. They hugged, an embrace without haste, without fear. Caroline left later that night, but she was sure to return, and the mansion finally felt like a real home.